Hi, I'm Nafisa Latic and this is Across the Balkans. For our first episode of 2022, we take you to the Croatian town that was devastated by an earthquake 1 year ago to see how the region has been rebuilt. Except it hasn't been. Despite millions of dollars worth of EU funds, Petrinja's city center still lies in ruins. And thousands of residents who decided to stay are still living in container homes that were meant to be temporary. Later in the show, I'll speak with the man who led the government's reconstruction efforts. That is, until he resigned in November in frustration over a lack of progress. But first, here is Veljko Skenderija's report from Croatia's forgotten fault lines.
This is what Petrinja looked like after the devastating earthquake in December 2020. It completely changed the lives not only of the town's inhabitants, but many people in Sisak Moslavina County, just south of the capital Zagreb. The damage was estimated at 5 billion euros. And this is what the city looks like today. The difference is minimal. And another winter has arrived. Temperatures are again well below zero, and people are still living in unrepaired homes or temporary housing. Those who have not yet left. Because many people are fleeing Petrinja, a place where, among other things, there is still no cinema, no theater, and no cultural scene 1 year on. Lea Kizilkaja from the civic initiative Petrinja Spring tells me there is a little left for people here.
Velik broj ljudi je odlučio otići. Otišle su mlade obitelji koji nisu vidjeli tu budućnost za svoju djecu, u smislu znači nedostatka i škola i mjesta neka za druženje. Vi nemate u Petrinji sportskih dvorana gdje možete djecu pružiti one osnovne uvjete za odrastanje, bavljanje sportom. Dječji park koji u početku je bilo jako teško doći do bilo kojeg od parka. Vi vidite da je centar sad grada neprohodan, a nama su i dalje neke od osnovnih institucija, infrastrukturnih bitnih elemenata tu u centru.
Petrinja and surrounding villages used to be a home to about 20,000 inhabitants. Today that number is almost halved, although Lea's initiative was called Petrinja Spring precisely because of the hope that a more serious reconstruction would begin after the spring. Practically no earthquake-stricken building has been renovated.
Po svim informacijama koje smo dobivali konkretno od Središnjeg ureda za obnovu i gospodina Hanžeka, da će se u Petrinju u nekom periodu sliti velik broj izvođača koji će prestati sa svojim radom znači, na moru, odnosno tamo kad počne sezona znate da građevinskih radova nema, pa smo mislili da će Petrinja u ljeto biti jedno veliko gradilište gdje će se na veliko obnavljati, lupat čekići i sve, nažalost od toga nema ništa.
This is Vladimir Nazor Street, a year after the devastating earthquake. Once the main city walking area, it was full of craft shops, stores and bars. Today, you enter here at your own risk. This street is actually a representation of what Petrinja has become. But something has sprouted. Today the center has been moved to the old fairgrounds. A big prefabricated structure has been built for those who had to leave the old center. Some cynically call it the center of new life. The right next to it is Petrinja residential container settlement, built mostly by donations that were supposed to go towards temporary homes. At least that's what the residents hoped for. But the hope is slowly fading.
Ne nadam se ničem. Pa zato što se ništa ne pomiče i tu smo gdje jesmo i očekujemo bar još jedno 5-6 godina da ćemo biti tu, minimalno. Unutra nisu uvjeti za živjeti, mislim tak s malom djecom, tako da ja bi što prije. Ili da nam se nešto riješi, da prebacimo se negdje u nekakvu kuću, nešto, bilo šta, ili jednostavno idemo dolje. Mali je prostor, nemaju se gdje djeca igrati. Realno kad ti pogledaš, evo sad je zima, ovo sad što je malo sunca izašlo da djecu izvedeš van. Gdje ćeš ovako?
We are traveling on to nearby Gljina, where there are more destroyed houses and people in containers. Many are so-called office containers. Unlike those in Petrinja, they don't have a kitchen, a toilet or water, and outside the temperature is approaching minus 10 degrees. While the situation in Petrinja is difficult, in Gljina and neighboring villages the conditions are even worse. Here people live in improvised shelters without basic living conditions. The second winter in a row in these so-called homes is expected to be even harsher than a previous one. But as they say here, if you have nowhere to go, the choice is clear. You stay and defy.
Salate ovako, to je to. 3. Ljudi, hvala vama. Vidimo se, živjeli.
And one of them is Branka, who lost everything in the earthquake. A simple meal can be prepared in an improvised kitchen. Luckily, cooked food comes to her every day except weekends. On the weekends, cans are on the menu. She uses water from the wells. The chemical toilet is emptied once a week and the shower is a pipe dream, says Branka.
Ja vjerujem da ima i mnogo težih slučajeva nego što je ovo ovdje do kojih vi jednostavno niste još uvijek došli. Ja vjerujem u to, ali kažem da sad na pragu stoljeća da mi razmišljamo o tome, mislim možemo li se istuširati ili ne istuširati, mi se čudimo covidu. Koji covid? Covid je fantastičan, mi ćemo šugu da dobijemo. Šugu, kožne bolesti.
Not far from Branka, in Majske Poljane, the most severely damaged settlement where 5 people lost their lives, lives Tana. The earthquake took everything away from her. And to make the tragedy incomparably worse, her husband and son passed away shortly after. Today she is alone with her daughter-in-law and 2 young girls. Despite the difficult conditions, she also does not want to leave her home.
Ja ovo ognjište ne mogu gasiti radi moga sina i moga muža. I ne želim to. A imam prilika da idem sutra. Ne dam se. Ja gonim i traktor i radim i prevlačim i sve što treba raditi muškarac radimo ja i moja snaja. Sve.
The 2 women and 2 girls live on an income of about €300 a month. I ask what she expects from the state and local authorities.
Pa bar jedan dio da imaš uslove za život. Ja nisam od onih koji nisu ništa imali, a danas imaju sve. Ja sam imala sve, ama sve. I priključke, i garaže, i štale, i sve. Sve s betonskim pločama. Sve. Sad nemam ništa, sad sam ja prosjak. Da.
The situation on the ground in Gljina and the surrounding villages is well known by the non-partisan deputy mayor and head of the association People for People, Branka Bakšić-Mitić. From the very beginning, she's been on the ground trying to help as much as she can. That is, as much as her powers and, above all, financial resources allow.
Ne znam, ja ne znam, je li to tromost, je to neorganizacija, uglavnom to nije u redu. Pazite, ja sam opet rekla da je Skoplje izgrađeno za godinu dana. Turska se obnovila, znači, pazite, to je bilo 63. je bilo Skoplje. 63. godine, kad još nije bilo ni takvih mašina, nije ništa bilo takve tehnologije i uspjeli su taj grad izgraditi za godinu dana. A Zagreb, pa još malo će biti 2 godine. Šta je u Zagrebu napravljeno? Ništa. Ja jednostavno nadu samo vidim u privatnim donacijama, ovdje sad već gubim svakakvu nadu jer vidim grad Zagreb se nije ništa napravio, Banija i prije bila zapostavljena, nije niko od nje vodio brigu. Evo mi smo 25 godina poslije rata, koliko je već 30 skoro, tu su bili ljudi koji nisu bili priključeni na struju, a prije rata su imali struju. O čemu onda govorim?
Thanks to private donations, so far 40 houses have been built or renovated in Gljina. Bearing in mind that people live in even worse conditions, one still has to wonder how is it possible that EU citizens still remain in this situation. especially considering that more than 300 million euros was approved from the EU for reconstruction alone. The fact is that a year has passed and nothing has changed. If we exclude the houses, damaged houses that were categorized as green, where roughly all you needed to do is to replace a chimney, then Croatian state hasn't rebuilt a single home. At least that's what I was told by everyone I met. So I went back to Zagreb to ask the government official in charge if that was really the case.
Pa pitanje je jednostavno.
Ma ne, pitanje je jednostavno. Ja znam kud ide odgovor. Odgovor ide u smjeru da država ništa nije učinila.
Ja ne znam kuda ide odgovor. To vi meni recite.
Ja mogu reći provociram. Znači, mi smo obnovili 1000 kuća sa zelenom naljepnicom.
To ste mi rekli. Je li istina da država nije obnovila nijednu kuću sa narančastom, žutom i crvenom naljepnicom?
Mi danas govorimo o nekonstruktivnoj, konstruktivnoj i zamjenskim izgradnji. Znači, reći da nismo obnovili ništa je vrlo hrabro.
Ne, ja pitam je li istina da niste obnovili nijednu sa tom žutom, narančastom, kako hoćete, i crvenom naljepnicom? Da ili ne?
Nismo.
You might expect that such a blatant admission of a lack of progress after an entire year would entail consequences in an EU country. The first man in charge of Zagreb Reconstruction, Damir Vanđelić, resigned when he realized repair work was at standstill, with 12,000 requests for help allegedly just gathering dust on a desk of Ministry of Construction. And while the Croatian government claims that it is rebuilding, the people I met in a seemingly parallel reality are going through another cold winter in inhumane conditions. The streets of Petrinja are still empty and ruined, and this newborn baby will almost certainly take her first steps among these containers. Veljko Skenderija for TRT World, Petrinja, Croatia.
Damir Vanđelić is our guest today. As we mentioned, he managed the Earthquake Recovery Agency until he left the post in December. Damir, thanks so much for being our guest here on Across the Balkans. Our first guest in 2022. Happy New Year. Why did you quit? What went wrong with the reconstruction process?
Well, all the best to you and to our viewers. Thank you very much for the invitation. So I've been in charge of setting up the agency and establishing the processes and organization, and that was my task. My task ended up in the mid of December, and therefore I have left the post.
And what went wrong? Why are these people that we've seen in Veljko's story, why are they still in temporary homes 12 months after the earthquake?
Well, this is really an unfortunate set of events. I must remind you that we had two major earthquakes. First one was in Zagreb in March 22nd in 2020, and the second one in December 29th and 30, which heavily damaged Petrinja area. Overall, we have 52,000 building that is damaged, of which the most of them, 41,600 houses, is damaged in Petrinja and neighboring counties. 95% of these buildings has been checked by civil engineers, and the process of refurbishment is ongoing.
And what do you think should have been done differently? So many people are still in temporary homes. They're saying they are not that optimistic even for the 2022. What went wrong in your opinion?
Well, firstly, Croatia does not have earthquakes so often, and our permanent organization in the country were not ready for such an event. So it took us only, not only, but too much time for the first law. We needed 6 months to provide the first earthquake recovery law, which was done after 6 months after the Zagreb earthquake. Following the best practice in the earthquake recovery, which says that there should be one leading agency, and we should also encourage ownership reconstruction. the government took a politically different approach. It took the agency-driven recovery, which means we have 2 agencies that are in charge of private homes, and we have about a dozen of ministries and cities that are taking care about the public buildings. So organization is quite complex and processes are complex. The private citizens should firstly make a request toward the Ministry of Building, which then issues a decision. Once the decision is made, the 2 agencies in charge of private buildings are only able to act. So the process is quite complex. We are improving it through time, but unfortunately for people that are suffering, this is of course not sufficiently quick enough.
And how many requests for help for reconstruction have you received while you were in office? And how many of them you sent to Ministry of Construction? And how many of these people actually had their homes rebuilt in the past year?
Well, so the process goes like this. The private citizens, and only in Petrinja area, there is about 34,000 requests for damaged buildings. So they put requests in the Ministry of Building, which is a kind of a coordinative body which issues the decisions. So the 2 agencies, Fund for Reconstruction, Agency for Reconstruction was one, receives the decisions. So until the year end, we have received only 5 decisions for building new homes. And we have received about 1,600 requests for payment. So 1,600 requests for payment are done. And for the 5 new homes, the process of procurement has been started and some contracts have been signed. But this is really almost nothing.
Almost nothing, extremely slow. People are frustrated. The Prime Minister Andrej Plenković visited Petrinja, the epicenter of the quake, and the citizens shouted, "We want reconstruction." They even hit him with a snowball. This is how he responded. Let's listen in.
The earthquake left many people in a difficult position. It's normal that some people are unhappy and show their dissatisfaction with protests and snowballs. All that is part of our job, and I understand that message.
Do you have a message for them?
As I said before, we will continue with the process, and we have to speed up the process so that people stop living in temporary houses and move to normal houses.
Will the criticism speed up the process? Are you optimistic?
Well, it should, and I see that the people are really trying their best. Of course, it's not enough. If you allow me, I can only remind you that in Petrinja and surrounding counties, 460 buildings have been removed. Non-constructive repairs has been done on 1,600 buildings, which is about 5% of repairs that needs to be done, and it has to go quicker. And 829 wells have been made functional. So there is also 9,500 constructive requests waiting to be approved in the Ministry of Building. So I believe that 2022 should be a year when everything should start, and I believe it's feasible to have about 1,000 new buildings being built, because it's quite simple construction.
Right. In the meantime, these people will be in these containers throughout the winter, and we know in the Balkans the winters can be really harsh. It's not looking very great, and Croatia is part of the EU. On top of everything, it did receive money from the EU Solidarity Fund. What's happening with that? How much was spent so far?
Well, the money from Solidarity Fund has been already allocated, but it's meant only for public buildings. And it's been allocated even more than 5 billion of kunas for Zagreb and 2 billion for Petrinja region. So we received about almost 1 billion euro for reconstruction, but of public buildings. Of that sum, approximately a very small amount actually has been spent, as far as I know. I haven't seen the overall report on that. But the rest is really allocated. So we will see how speedily they will be able to deliver the reconstruction of public buildings? Or will the deadline be prolonged, as Prime Minister promised?
Okay, Damir Vanđelić, thank you so much for your time for us here Across the Balkans. There was no shortage of political drama, environmental challenges and social upheaval in the Balkans last year. Elections brought in new political leaders, while other nations felt the effects of democratic backsliding. And of course, COVID-19 paralyzed everyone's lives. So what might 2022 have in store for the region? Aksel Zajmović takes a look into his crystal ball.
Живееме во турбулентни времења на кризи и неизвестности. Соочени сме со многогодишни проблеми кои го попречуваат напредокот на државата и остварување на стратешките цели. Ваквите времења бараат стабилни, одговорни и храбри луѓе кои ќе понесат одговорност да се соочат и да ги надминат сите препреки со цел заштита и грижа за граѓаните.
Calls for stability rang out from Skopje as the new year was ushered in. The sentiments resonate with people across the region. But they were the words of North Macedonia's incoming Prime Minister, who begins 2022 with a mandate to form a new government. One of Dimitar Kovacevski's key priorities this year is addressing his nation's long-running dispute with Bulgaria that has kept the bloc from joining the European Union. Hopes are now higher that a resolution can be reached with Bulgaria's new Prime Minister, Kirill Petkov. North Macedonia is not alone when it comes to stalled EU membership negotiations, and it's also just one of several nations that's set for new political leadership in the year ahead. On January 18th, Albania's constitutional court is set to rule on whether President Ilir Meta can serve out the remainder of his term to the middle of the year, or whether his impeachment from last year will take effect, thus removing him from office. Theoretically, a ceremonial role, the president repeatedly clashed with the governing Socialist Party of Prime Minister Edi Rama. Meanwhile, the opposition Democratic Party is in disarray over who its rightful leader is. Serbia's President Aleksandar Vučić will be fighting for re-election in April. Despite facing numerous challenges from COVID-19, environmental protests, and an over-reliance on Russian gas, a win by Vučić seems all but guaranteed. These three nations, Serbia, Albania, and North Macedonia, will be looking to advance their Open Balkan initiative launched last year. The mini Schengen zone is seen as a rebuke to Brussels for dragging its feet on enlargement, but the customs union has strained relations with neighbors, particularly over who's been excluded.
Dakle, Srbija mora sama odlučiti šta hoće. Ove finte sa slobodnim Balkanom, a nije 914. više, mislim, okej. Neka ljudi slobodno šetaju. Bez Kosova jasne su intencije. Dakle, one nisu baš humanističke.
Kjo është sa I përket fillimit, por natyrisht Kosova ka edhe shumë shqetësime të tjera lidhur me qëllimet e kësaj iniciative dhe në veçanti qëllimet që Serbia I ka në këtë iniciativë, me qenë se ky shtet akoma nuk e ka njohur Republikën e Kosovës.
Kosovo began the new year in a state of emergency, imposed due to the country's worst energy crisis in a decade. High energy prices, fuel shortages, and infrastructure problems have led to daily power cuts, and the country is being forced to import more power than normal. Elections are also due to be held in Slovenia, where critics of the government hope opposition parties can team up to defeat right-wing Prime Minister Janez Janša and his long-dominant Slovenian Democratic Party. And then there is Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Here on the streets of the capital Sarajevo, people are hoping the new year brings some political calm and stability. Tensions erupted last year when Milorad Dodik, Bosnian Serb leader, went further than he'd ever done before with his push to break the Republika Srpska entity away from the rest of the country. The prospect that Bosnia could be split weighs heavily on people's minds.
It's feared that Republika Srpska's withdrawal from the country's joint military, constitutional court, and tax authority could soon take effect. Elections in October will reveal whether Dodik's maneuvers are rejected or rewarded by voters. In Montenegro, a political impasse, also triggered by a genocide denial law, has continued into the new year. The ruling coalition formed to successfully oust Milo Đukanovic's Democratic Party of Socialists has been plagued by infighting and competing interests ever since. bringing any hope of reform to a standstill. And of course, the whole region is still in the grip of COVID-19. A fourth wave is poised to crash over the Balkans, with infections spreading rapidly due to the Omicron variant. Unsurprisingly, the coronavirus curtailed a lot of the usual New Year celebrations. Many are hoping this year will be the one when the pandemic ends and where normal life and tourism can return in full swing. The Balkans has been central to so many dramatic events in history. The region is also famously unpredictable. But if one thing's for sure in 2022, it's that we'll be watching closely. Axel Zaimovic, TRT World, Sarajevo.
Thanks for watching this episode of Across the Balkans. From me and the team here in Istanbul, bye-bye for now, and I hope I'll see you next time.